Good morning, everyone. This is Derek Milo, Communications Director for MAC, and welcome to our webinar today on county preparedness plans. We have several people with us from MMRMA. I could say all of that out loud, but I don't think we've got the time to completely spell it out. So first off, we have Stephen Tobler, Senior Risk Control Consultant, who has more than 25 years of consulting experience with governmental entities and subject matter expertise in various municipal service areas. We also have Cindy King, MMRMA's Director of Membership Services and Human Resources, who has more than 40 years of experience in public administration and 16 years in elective office. Let's see, has Tim been able to? Tim McClory of MMRMA may be joining us here in a few minutes. He was having some technical difficulties. So I am going to get the document up. Let's see, there we go. Okay, and I'm going to disappear here, and we should be able to see the screen for the model plan, and I'm going to turn it over to Cindy and Stephen.
Very good. Excuse me. First of all, I'd like to thank all of the MAC members who are joining us today, and I hope you can hear me and see the document that Derek has shared on the screen. As we go through this, I don't know if you all have this problem, but I know sometimes when I've participated in virtual meetings, it's best if everybody is on mute so that we don't get any feedback through the system that may make it hard for people to follow along. And my understanding is there is a chat feature so that if you need to ask questions, you can go to the chat feature and ask those questions. On behalf of MMRMA, I would like to thank Derek and Stephen Curry for this opportunity to present the model COVID-19 preparedness and response plan and instructions for that plan. I'd like to thank my colleagues, Tim McClory and Stephen Tobler for joining in today. If you have any questions about risk control or things like that, hopefully between the three of us, we can answer those questions. As you can see with regard to the plan, it was created with the legal expertise from DICOMA, particularly two attorneys, Elisa Lintemuth and Courtney Cassell. They've helped us with this. We have had two reviews of this plan. As you know, this plan was a mandate through Governor Whitmer's Executive Order 2020-42 and her subsequent Executive Order 2020-59. So the plan was created initially in response to the first executive order and then updated to reflect mandates in the second executive order. Today, I think the objectives for all of you is, first of all, the plan is a requirement of the executive order, so we want to make sure that you're able to develop these plans in compliance with both executive orders. Secondly, as the plan sets forth, it's to identify critical infrastructure workers. And while that may be easy when we're talking sheriffs and correctional officers, it may be a little more murky when we're talking about other staff that support county operations. So the plan helps you to think about what critical operations are you offering for which we need to identify those workers formally through this plan. If you need assistance in identifying critical infrastructure workers, and in particular classifying their risk exposure to COVID-19, I suggest that you go to the OSHA, a document, it's a PDF document on the OSHA website. It's called Guidance on Preparing Workplaces for COVID-19. Secondly, the plan, one of the goals of that is to determine how to keep those employees who are working on site safe. There are such things as the employee screening form and visitor screening form, and then to adopt a policy to prevent sick workers from entering the premises. Lastly, the plan mandates that you set forth identify a COVID-19 workplace coordinator. That can be an overall one individual for the county entirely, or separate workplace COVID-19 coordinators among various departments. At MMRMA, we employ about 45 of us, and I am the COVID-19 coordinator. One is sufficient for our purposes. Lastly, you'll want your county commission to approve this plan. And as you go forward, I think it's a stepping stone to guide your return to work or return to normal or restart plans as the coronavirus subsides. So with that, Derek, if you'd like to go to the plan itself, that has disappeared from my screen. So I'm not sure, Derek, if you still have it up or if you've had a technical difficulty in that regard.
Yep, we're having a little technical problem here, so. It's not wanting to. Okay, can you see it now?
Yes, yes.
Okay, great.
If I could continue and I'm not seeing any questions, but if you have any, please feel free to ask them. The plan includes instructions, and those are the first couple of pages in the model plan. And first of all, it reminds you to review the 2 executive orders, 2020-42 and 2020-59. That sets forth you may not operate any business or conduct operations other than those that are essential to sustain or protect life. And I think you understand that as county officials, what that means. Again, the plan says that you will set forth and limit those individuals who will be on site. So not every employee is expected to be on site. You know, again, corrections, law enforcement, the health departments, medical facilities. I think that goes without saying. You have essential workers in those fields. Parks and Recreation, maybe less so. The Secretary in Public Works who schedule special pickups. You know, that may be unnecessary at this point in time. The one thing I wanted to say is when MMRMA developed this, we couldn't develop individual plans for 400 members. So we tried to provide general guidelines that you can modify for your unique circumstances. As I looked online today, I saw that, you know, some of our county members fortunately have 10 or less positive COVID cases, and others have, you know, almost 2,000, and certainly Wayne County is much higher than that. But obviously that speaks to the size of your communities and the amount of departments you may be addressing through determining your critical essential workers. So as we continue on, the plan will restrict workers, the types of operations they perform, and their access to county facilities. Derek, if you could scroll up the page a bit. Once you've identified those workers that are critical infrastructure workers, you need to look at the job classifications and determine if those individuals are very high exposure, high exposure, lower exposure, medium risk, that kind of thing. That OSHA guide I mentioned at the beginning is a very useful tool for that. I do have a PDF of that. I could send that to you, Derek, if you've not seen it, and you could perhaps push it out to your members if they haven't. Obviously, when we're talking very high exposure, you know, anyone treating a COVID patient, so whether that's a doctor, a nurse, a paramedic, an EMT, someone in healthcare, someone doing lab work, morgue workers, obviously are very high risk. Their potential for exposure is significantly greater than someone in a lower exposure. Also in a high risk, not very high, but high risk exposure could again be nurses, not necessarily dealing with COVID patients exclusively, but potentially exposed to someone who's been, who may be positive for COVID. And then lower exposure workers who may still be necessary to perform critical functions. You know, maybe people have to go on site to do your payroll or to do your payables, print checks, that kind of thing. They may not be working with ill people, but they would be those employees deemed to be low exposure. Derek, if we could move up a little bit. So within each job classification, you will want to look at how to restrict or how to keep them safe and implement controls. As step 4 notes, promoting regular hygiene and cleaning. And if you do not have a supply of hand sanitizer and bleach wipes, Clorox wipes, things like that, I encourage you to get those kinds of things. The plan does mandate that employers will provide that to employees. Frequently cleaning surfaces. And when you're looking at surfaces, you know, think beyond the obvious. How many people may get into a backhoe to operate it? How many people may get into an ambulance to operate it? How many people walk into, you know, a copy machine to make a copy of something and they're touching the keypad on the copier, or something as innocuous as a stapler or a letter opener? Those are all things that, if they're commonly shared, they need to be frequently cleaned. As it talks in here too, it talks about using EPA-approved disinfectants. You may want to consider fogging and more deep cleaning in those areas that are commonly used. You know, above and beyond that, that spraying down or wiping down of surfaces, simply, again, in the best interest of keeping people safe. And for all of you, because I'm sure you have members of the public entering your buildings, perhaps less so than in a normal workday, something that occurred back in February before this all took place. But again, keep in mind that cleaning does reduce risk to exposure to COVID-19. PPE, employers are required to provide personal protective equipment. What is that? Minimally, that's face coverings and gloves. It may include eye goggles or eyeglasses. Those look very similar to what you see somebody wearing on a construction site. Again, that's something that the employer is required to do. Right now, there's you may have employees self-reporting their health, but adopt a policy to prevent workers from entering the workplace. At MMRMA, if you have a temperature, if you display the symptoms, and there's an attachment here to this in the appendices, Appendix B, that lists the symptoms that have been identified as being possibly indicative of exposure to COVID-19. We are not allowing employees on site or to enter our premises if they display those symptoms. Instead, we're sending them home. In your organizations, I don't know if you have somebody that is the only individual who can do that job, but if so, then you would need to isolate that individual from the rest of the population. What is isolation? A separate room maybe that they work out of while they're there. But again, the best course of action is if you can remove them from the premises to do so. Our model plan does include the employee screening form that you can simply place your name on and adopt as your own. There's also a visitor screening form. Again, that's something simply lists the name of the county, and you know, if you need to modify it slightly for your purposes, depending on what department or what building it may be in, you know, please feel free to do so. It's there for that purpose. Both forms identify the expanded list of symptoms. As you know, when this first came to us in March, symptoms were a fever over 100 degrees, a sore throat, and a cough. It's been expanded to other things, chills, shakes, atypical cough, atypical tightness in chest, that kind of thing. So again, those forms have been provided to you. We do advise, and the form does set forth a notice for other employees if any of your employees test positive. If they've tested positive or possibly been exposed, hopefully they are noticing you as the employer, and you in turn will notice your employees about that. When you do that notice, do not identify that employee. In fact, I would use the term employee so as not to even identify the gender of that individual to protect their privacy. But again, notice your staff so that they know. Continuing on in the document, Derek, if we can scroll down a bit. As employees work on site, you may want to consider staggered shifts. I suspect that many of you may have collective bargaining agreements that may dictate some requirements in that regard. Certainly sit down with those employee groups if that's possible to make some changes in start times, end times. You know, maybe there's a group of employees, if they need to be in the building, they're in there on Monday and Wednesdays, and other employees are in there on Tuesday and Thursdays. Certainly establish social distancing. You've seen this on the news and on television, 6 feet apart. If you've got coworkers and it's not possible to be 6 feet apart, hopefully you have some kind of screening device so that as they're talking to others, that droplets and things that may emit from their mouths don't transmit to another individual. So that could be a sneeze guard, a plexiglass screen, that kind of thing. Those things are all required to protect people. For those with medical facilities where you may have beds and people there, you may need to increase your ventilation rates and look at higher filtration systems and HEPA filters and things beyond that to protect them. And again, those in the medical profession, hopefully you have access to N95 masks. Last I heard, there wasn't the shortage, at least in Michigan, as there may have been earlier. And you also need a business continuity plan under step 5. It talks about, how are you going to continue to work? So give consideration to what does that continuity plan look like in your organizations. And I apologize as I look away from the screen because I'm reading from my hard copy of this document. But with regard to a business continuity plan, again, identify your COVID-19 workplace coordinator, who could be your HR director, it could be the county administrator, it could be a department head for each department, whichever is your best means of keeping employees informed and learning if you have employees who have been exposed. Identify alternate supply chains if you're having a hard time getting something that you need to provide services, and develop your emergency communication plan. How do you notice other employees if they've been exposed to or possibly exposed to COVID-19? And if you've got employees calling off sick, do you have enough employees who can continue operating your essential business functions? Do you have employees who are cross-trained? Obviously, if you're a smaller organization, that becomes more of a challenge. But do you have people who can fill in if somebody becomes ill and is unable to work, or is staying home to care for somebody who has become ill? And again, lastly, do you have governing body approval for the plan that you put in place? Derek, I can walk through the plan itself if necessary.
Right now, we don't have any questions for you to field, so
Okay.
I would continue to proceed going through the plan until we do.
Okay. So the plan we put together, again, it's a model plan. It will likely need customization, and especially for organizations that are very large and have lots of employees and lots of departments. But the plan. There's a table of contents that, as you can see on the screen now, we talk about sick leave, and you'll remember there's the Families First Coronavirus Response Act that expands family medical leave. I encourage you to look at that. That FFCRA applies to employers with 500 or less employees, so certainly something to take a look at. But remote work, I'm sure lots of you are trying to impose remote work, but to the extent that somebody is not needed, is not an essential worker, they should not be on your site. If they can work remotely, hopefully they can. I do know some of you are looking at furloughs and things like that, and that's unfortunate, but I do understand finances. But employee screening before they enter the workplace. In the case of MMRMA, every day that an employee, a critical infrastructure worker, comes on site, they complete that employee screening form. They attest that they don't have any of the symptoms that could indicate COVID-19. They attest that while they're in public spaces, they will wear a face covering, whether that's the PPE masks we provide them or other document or another face covering, a bandana, a handkerchief, something like that. They recognize that they are to wear those while they're in the public spaces, coming into the building and traveling through a hallway that may lead to a private office. Enhanced social distancing, again, 6 feet away. You may want to set up one-way routes on your hallways so that you don't have employees potentially facing each other as they pass in a hallway, particularly if it's a hallway that they can't 6-foot distance at the point they pass each other. Again, proper cleaning of tools and equipment. The plan talks about, again, the type of cleaning, whether it's wipes, whether it's hand sanitizer, things like that, frequent hand washing. The medical experts have said that's one of the most important things to do is frequently hand wash. So hopefully you have signs in all of the restrooms open to employees. And when we're speaking of restrooms, if you have smaller restrooms and employees can't enter in there and maintain 6 feet distance while they're at the sink, you may want to make that a 1-person only restroom, put signage on the exterior doors accordingly so that they know. I'm not quite sure. I think of the dishwasher sign where it says dirty, clean, that you can rotate with a magnet, but maybe something similar to that they can rotate if it's a restroom that we can't achieve 6-foot distancing on. Visitors, you are public entities, so I recognize that it's a little different for you. You do have the public who needs to come in. They need to socially distance. They need to be wearing a face mask while they're in the building. If you have enough PPE to provide that to them, that's great. But if they can at least put a bandana on, that helps. The screening forms identify those conditions: fever, shortness of breath, continuous cough, fever, chills, repeated shaking, muscle pain, headache, loss of taste or smell. That was something relatively new that came about in the latest updates about the COVID-19 and its symptoms. Confirmed cases. Again, if an employee is a confirmed case, to the point that you can, we recommend sending them home. If they cannot, if they're needed to be there, then do your best to isolate those individuals from the rest of the workplace. As far as deep cleaning, obviously any area where people with positive cases of COVID, confirmed cases, you will want to consider some deeper cleaning so as to guard against exposure to others. Derek, as far as the plan itself, I've walked through that, identifying your critical infrastructure workers. Those are in healthcare, law enforcement, food and agriculture, energy, water, wastewater, transportation, public works, your IT staff, critical manufacturing if you're producing something, which probably isn't as applicable to counties.
Right, Cindy, one of the things that our administrators have been asking each other about in the last couple of days is, when should employees be wearing masks around their buildings?
Yes, and that's an important.
The different issues like, should an employee be wearing a mask sitting at their desk in a shared office space?
So do you want me to address that?
Sure.
So from a risk control perspective, if we take from OSHA, okay, and we look at something called a job hazard analysis, a job hazard analysis is essentially a risk assessment of each and every job. What's the job? What tasks are involved? What threats or potential exposures are involved? And then what do we do to control those things? If we take from that philosophy and we say, okay, now that we've got this pandemic, what is this job that we're going to do? Are we going to be sitting at a reception desk and answering the phone? Are we going to be interacting with people? What are we going to be doing? And I think if you use that form or that philosophy, you can quickly identify what's the task that this employee is going to be responsible for. And from that, you can say, okay, you're going to need to do social distancing, you're going to need PPE, etc. So I think that will help out answer that question the most. And it's going to be an individual case-by-case basis, because MAC obviously represents the counties in Michigan, and MMRMA has 80% of the counties as our members. So we get the fact that elected officials have different offices and they, to some degree, run their own show, right? But we want to have some consistency in how we approach the challenge.
Great. Also, just a reminder to everybody out in the audience, if you have questions, now's the time to be posing them. I'm looking at my screen right now, and let's see, I think we finally got one. Is there a job hazard analysis tool that you can share with us?
That's going to be available from OSHA, and that's federal OSHA. So if you go onto OSHA's website, you will probably have to hunt a little bit. I don't know if we have it on our site yet. We can certainly try to find it and post it on ours. So that's something that we can look up and try to provide.
Okay.
Let me also add a couple other things from a risk control perspective, some other resources that you might find helpful. Obviously MAC and then MMRMA for those of you that are members. You've also, every county has an emergency risk manager. They have a tremendous amount of resources and tools available to you, so I encourage you to interact with those folks. Most of you will have a work comp provider, unless you do your own, which some do, but a work comp provider may also have some tools for you. The CDC, which constantly, and the governor's office, they're constantly coming up with new things and giving the latest and greatest reports. So I think those are excellent resources. And then your legal counsel. If you're going to make a change to a policy, particularly one that develops or that deals with employment practices, you'll want to run that by your legal counsel prior to implementation. And lastly, you've got Michigan and National PRIMA, which are organizations specifically that deal with risk management for public entities. In fact, PRIMA, the national, just came out with a couple of seminars this morning. One is the podcast, Keeping Up with First Responders and Presumption Laws, COVID-19 Managing the Reopen. So there's some great resources out there for you. Thank you.
Great.
And Derek, Derek, I would add to that, in addition to the job hazard analysis tool OSHA provides, OSHA has a document, I mentioned it at the beginning, it's called OSHA Guidance, OSHA Guidance for, let me get back to the title here, Preparing Workplaces for COVID-19. And I have page 18 up on my monitor, and it talks about classifying worker exposure. So it's that very high risk. And it also talks about what to provide as far as controls for them, PPE, things like that. So it's another tool in addition to the tool that Stephen mentions. I think if members look at both of those tools, it will give them good guidance on what to do as far as when to wear masks and that kind of thing. I will tell you at MMRMA, our plan mandates that in any public area, so that if you're walking down the hallway to go to the copier to get the checks off the check printing device or to use the restroom, that you will have a mask on. Once you're in your private office or your cubicle, then the mask can come off. But understand, at most in our building, we may have 3 or 4 people on site at most. And typically not employees working alongside each other. So we may have one claims adjuster, someone in finance, someone in underwriting, and those individuals are all spread out through the building. It's not common for us to have all of our claims adjusters on site right now at one time.
Right.
So,
Cindy, can I just jump in and kind of hone this down a little bit? So in many of our members in the courthouses and their county buildings, they will have multiple employees working in a wide open office without cubicle walls. In those circumstances where those people are sitting at their desks working, and they might be 6 feet apart, they might not be, but it is in an open space without cubicle walls, should they be masking up or not?
My recommendation is they should.
Okay, thank you.
And I would concur with that, absolutely. From a risk management standpoint, it's better, I think, to be safer.
Okay. Next question. This is out of Grand Traverse. The model policy doesn't appear to address off-site services such as inspections and counsel on aging, home care services relative to the employee's comfort level being at the privately owned location. Would you recommend addressing a screening procedure for service recipients and an allowance for an employee to not provide the service if the employee is not comfortable. So basically, employees that are outside the county building environment in the course of their daily job.
So we've got, yeah, I think you looked at it from three perspectives. The first perspective is, okay, I'm going to be providing a service outside the county, and I'm going to be in close proximity to a patron or what have you. For that, I would say you're probably going to want to use PPE. If you can identify that this person is high risk, then your level of PPE may be higher, just like it would for an ambulance or emergency worker, some type. Getting into the, hey, we don't want to provide the service, I would delineate what services are critical. Can I do certain services remotely? In other words, can we do a video chat to get medication or something like that? Versus I have to be in close proximity. And that's the last piece of that. Do I have to be in close proximity and can I refuse? That's the one that you're going to need to go back to your legal counsel for and get an answer that way.
Okay, great. Checking to see if there are other questions right now. I am not currently seeing other questions. So if you do have a question, administrators, now is the time to be asking it.
One other thing that I might suggest, because we have county government, which is typically decentralized, and we have a lot of elected officials with offices, and many of them run their own show. We had talked earlier about having a county-wide versus a sort of office coordinator. In either case, whichever case you're going to do, the plans really need to be consistent. And the reason for that is if I am an employee and I work in one office, but I have to go interact with another office, I want to know that the protocols are the same or very similar. Now, granted, there's certain functions like going into the jail, which not everybody does, I get that, so they may have additional procedures, but the baseline procedure should be very consistent whether you have one coordinator or multiple coordinators.
Okay, great, Stephen, thank you. I do have another question here. What should a county administration do if their board of commissioners does not pass a plan?
That's a good question. I would be curious as to why they would not pass a plan. This is about keeping people safe. This is about keeping the employees who they need to provide those essential services at this point in time. That critical function that has to be out. Perhaps the plan is unclear to them or something. I would encourage that. Again, perhaps as Stephen said, in this case also, legal counsel may be helpful in explaining the importance of this and the risks for not having a plan in place. The other thing, Derek, I know you and I talked about, I don't know, this plan is set forth in the executive order. I don't know if this plan will have any bearing in the future with regard to any state funding that may be available to counties to assist in addressing COVID expenses. So again, the executive order sets forth that there will be a plan. Hopefully most county commissions will understand that as they get the plan, and hopefully the plan is clear enough and understood by everyone. This is about those critical workers, those essential workers to carry out business, and when they're doing that, keeping them and the public they serve safe.
Okay, thank you. Next question. County had concerns about an employee performing the entry screenings and instead are thinking about having employees self-monitor and fill out and submit the questionnaire daily to their department head or human resources.
Stephen, do you have
Sure. Are they talking about self-monitoring themselves or patrons that come in?
I'm reading it as themselves, employees self-monitoring themselves.
I think that is appropriate. Different places can do it different ways. At MMRMA, like Cindy has said, we have a protocol in place. We have forms, and the employees sign off on the form. It's really self-monitoring. Now, with that said, if I, as an employee, observe another employee who has some what appear to be potentially obvious symptoms, then I may report that, and there should be a protocol for that. But I think self-reporting, for the most part, will be sufficient.
Okay. The next question, I'm not sure you guys will want to field this. It looks to be more legal in nature. If our county is low risk, can we reopen to full staffing without public access to the building before May 18?
Yeah, I think that one I would recommend that they consult with their in-house counsel.
Okay. And this kind of goes back, Cindy, to what you're talking about with the executive order. Is there a date that you need to have a plan in place?
I did not see anything that mandates a date, but obviously 2020-42 was an executive order issued in mid-April. I think the expectation would be that a plan would have been in place relatively soon. What's relative? You know, that's a great question. I recognize county commissions may be only holding monthly meetings or meetings as necessary. It does require county commission approval, so those all influence that. But I think to have something in place so that employees are assured of what their employer intends to do to keep the workplace safe, to provide cleaning, to provide PPE. I think to have a document like this in place sooner than later is the course of action.
Okay, great. Next question. Can you elaborate a little bit on screening process for the public entering buildings? Should we screen all who enter, and how?
So one of the things that I might suggest is that if we look at this from a different perspective, and if we look at it from a security perspective, because active assailants are on the rise, we know that. And one of the protections of active assailants is access control and compartmentalizing. If we take that same philosophy and we say, okay, maybe we have limited access to the building, people funnel through one area, and secondly, we identify, hey, what service do you need? Oh, you need that? Okay, we've got terminals perhaps over here, you can do that online. Maybe you do or don't need to see someone in the building. Maybe we can do that remotely. Maybe you have to see them face to face. So having a gatekeeper to identify, does someone need to go into the building, and if so, how far? In terms of your people screening people, that's typically something that if they get into the medical side, we're shying away from. If you want to have a contractor come out and do it and have risk transfer agreements in place, perhaps. But generally, we shy away from that. Unless, Cindy, you have other ideas on that?
No, I think you're spot on, Stephen. In the model plan, Appendix D is a sample visitor COVID-19 screening form. It's the same, pretty much the same as the employee screening form, but you ask the visitor to self-report if in the past 24 hours they've experienced an atypical cough, atypical shortness of breath, or at least two of these symptoms: fever of 100 degrees or above, chills, repeated shaking, muscle pain, sore throat, headache, or new or loss of taste or smell. And then finally, we ask, in the last 14 days, have you had close contact within 6 feet of someone with a diagnosis of COVID-19, or have you traveled internationally or domestically? And if they say yes to any of those symptoms, they're not permitted access to the premises. And then finally, we ask them to acknowledge that while they're in the buildings, in enclosed public spaces, that they will wear a face covering of some form. And then on the form, we recommend that the date and time that individual was handed the form, we ask them to identify what part of the building they're going into. Are they going into your courtroom? Are they going into the Register of Deeds office, or what have you, county treasurer, whatever it may be. And then we note the date they go in and the date and time, and who they spoke to, and that can be that individual Stephen referenced, whoever may be at that access. And as he noted, you may want limited access so that not every door is open to everyone, and funnel people accordingly into one that you can staff. with someone to do that screening.
I want to follow up with this and take this to the next level. If we think these things out and what could happen, I want to address the individual that refuses. I want to come in your building, but I don't want to wear a mask. We've seen in Michigan recently a tragic event with a private vendor, right? You have to be prepared to go to that next level of, if someone says no to your rules, what are you going to do? And maybe it's a point of, well, we've got some extra masks here. They're, we give them out one-time use if someone actually doesn't have them because they're indigent, they don't have them, they can't make them, whatever, okay? We want to make that available to people, perhaps. So that's something to consider, but the bigger thing is, what do you do if you get a refusal? You have to have a protocol in place, and the employees have to know what that is.
And Stephen, that protocol could be, you're not allowed in the building.
All right, can you kind of elaborate on that from Stephen? You mentioned obviously the incident, and I think it was in Flint
Yes.
regarding use of lethal force. Would you be recommending to counties that they have security personnel at this access point, and whether that's contracted or sheriff deputy?
Well, that's up to the county, obviously. The way that I approach this is, it's your place, your rules. I think that limiting access, you will limit the amount of people that freely come into the building. And so by that very nature, you're going to have less of that. And if you have sheriff's deputies, or if you have contracted security, you don't have to have as much of it because it's only in one location. So if you choose to do that, it may be appropriate to do that in the initial or incipient stages of reopening, and then to lessen that as time goes on. That's, again, a question that maybe your legal staff would answer.
Okay, thanks. So now we've got a couple of questions on issue of how long should employee monitoring continue? And is there a benchmark that county should look for when monitoring should continue or discontinue?
I think part of that's going to be related to what the governor says and what the CDC says. We don't know. We've never seen this kind of thing before, so we just don't know.
I think Stephen's correct, and I guess what I would say is, for the time being anyway, until we get more guidance and direction. Certainly, as long as we're in this stay home executive order environment, it would continue. Once there's some opening, if you will, with more employers opening and perhaps more employees on site, it may be something, depending on positive cases and data that we get about this, to continue it at some point into the future. I don't think that's known to anyone at this stage.
Okay, thank you. Pivoting back to the earlier question about the employees doing self-evaluation upon entry into the building, question about what do you do about temperature screening in those circumstances?
Well, I think that's something that you need to handle carefully if you choose to do that. I've seen on the news that that's taking place among some private employers. Right now, I think our preferred course is employees self-screen. Stephen, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
And I would concur with that, because you're starting to broach into a HIPAA area, because now you're actually testing people for their medical condition. First of all, do you have the staff that are trained to do that, to not only administer the test, but also to properly address the HIPAA issues associated with the test and its results. So we tend to, I think, shy away from that a bit.
Yeah. The other thing for those who, it wouldn't be as simple as just handing a contactless thermometer to the receptionist who has no medical background. To my knowledge, those handheld devices, you can't effectively obtain a temperature and maintain social distancing. So I think there's that challenge in and of itself, practically speaking.
Okay, thanks. There's a comment in the question field. One of the counties initially tried to procure thermometers for each employee, but could not. And they discovered there's a smartphone app to take temperatures and avoid HIPAA concerns since the temperature is taken and stored on the employee's own device. Are you familiar with that app?
I've heard of the app, but you've really got the same concern because now it's the employee who's testing themselves, or if you have someone else using the phone to test an employee, you still got part of the HIPAA concern. So, I mean, if an employee feels comfortable doing that and they say, hey, my temperature is too high, I don't want to come in, and they're signing off the affidavit that they can't come to work, okay, I get that. But again, as a protocol across the organization, we're shying away from that, I think.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, right now I don't see any additional questions. I'm going to take a moment to mention the fact we are recording this video. A link to it will be placed on our COVID resources page at micounties.org. We strongly encourage everyone to visit that page daily because we are updating it daily with new resources as Cindy, Stephen, and the team at MMRMA share more documents with us, such as OSHA, the OSHA documents mentioned. We'll make sure that there are links to that on the resource page as well. But be sure to visit micounties.org to see all that information. So last call for questions for the team from MMRMA.
And I would comment, Derek, if you are an MMRMA member, we have a number of documents available on our webpage too, a wealth of information, links to the CDC and other organizations that can be of assistance too. And as Stephen said, we did develop the model plan and we recognized it wouldn't, that it will need modification and customization based on the services each individual county provides, the size of the organization, that kind of thing. But we tried to broadly, if you will, cover those areas of concern that are set forth in the governor's executive orders. But we do have a wealth of information. We update that on a regular basis. If you are an MMRMA member, that's available to you. And in addition, as you go through developing your plan and you have questions, MMRMA employs a number of risk control consultants such as Stephen with subject matter expertise that reach out to us. We're there to be a resource to you. While we had attorneys from DICOMA develop this, in certain areas, as we've noted previously, you may want to speak with your attorney about specific instances in your own organization. Neither Stephen or I are attorneys, and so we don't want to represent ourselves in that regard. So there may be matters for which legal counsel is warranted.
Great. Cindy, thank you. Stephen, thank you. Again, thank you to MMRMA. I would ask that everybody stay on the webinar just for a second here. I'm going to try to share a different screen just for a second here. Let's see if I can pull it up. Well, let's see. Hang on just a second. And well, I've hidden it from myself. Oh, whoop, there it is. Okay. So I'm hoping everybody can now see the screen for labor and economic opportunity. I'm going to use my panelist. Cindy, can you see that screen?
Yes, I can.
Okay. All right. The reason I'm sharing this screen is the governor and the Department of Labor held a virtual meeting opportunity very late yesterday afternoon to go over state response for local government officials. And one of the things that Labor, or LEO as it's now called, was pushing the unemployment insurance Workshare program. So you can see there, if you can see my toolbar, you can see the actual URL. We are going to be placing this link on our resources page, but they were highly touting this Workshare program, which just very basically, if you have employees where you really can't run them at 40 hours a week, but you don't want to lose their expertise, there is a way for you to reduce their hours and then move them into this Workshare program where they're being partially compensated for the missed hours. So it's kind of a hybrid system that employers can utilize. So we're encouraging our members to take a look at that as they're, of course, cycling their staffs back up as part of any type of reopening strategy. So again, you'll be able to see this link at our resources page in probably about the next 15 minutes. And then once again, the video of today's session will also appear on the resources page so that anybody can access it 24/7. If you had colleagues that just couldn't log on today, that they can be able to view it at 24/7. So again, remember to visit micounties.org and access our COVID resources page. And with that, I do again want to thank the folks from MMRMA for all of the counsel today on what are exceedingly complex topics involving personnel. And again, be sure to visit micounties.org. Thank you and be safe.
Thank you.
Thank you.